Hello and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kek Roys, Vice President of Healthcare Risks with Bender Insurance Solutions. We want to welcome you to our first quarterly CFO Roundtable. We will be covering CARES Act Provider Relief Fund. Some housekeeping notes. At the end of this webinar, we will be having an engaging Q&A session that I will be facilitating. Our speakers and panelists are also available to answer any questions that arise throughout our presentation. During our Q&A time near the end of the presentation, we want this to be interactive, and we created this forum to allow each of you to hear from each other, connect, and network. We want the floor to be open to everyone to share your experiences, concerns, and questions. We want to be conscious of time, so if we do not get to answer all of your questions, we will gladly reach out to you individually after the webinar. You are all in listen-only mode and will remain muted until the Q&A session. I will unmute anyone who raises their hand to allow you to ask questions. This session is being recorded. At the conclusion of the webinar, the recording link and slide deck will be forwarded to you. We have a fantastic set of experts sharing with us this afternoon. Our presenters are from CLA. We have Janet Tolander, Principal of Healthcare, and Adam Roth, Director of Healthcare. On our panelists, we have Mark Jenkins, CFO of Eschaton, and Scott Roys, Finance Manager of Dignity Health. I will now hand it off to Janet, and she will start our presentation.
Thanks, Kek, and thanks for having us. So what Adam and I are going to do is a very condensed version of a recorded webinar that we have on our website if you'd like to see the full thing. But we wanted to do a condensed version. We think that a lot of you are probably fairly caught up on this, but if we can provide some tips or insights, but really want to hear from Mark and Scott with their experience as well. So again, as Kek said, happy to take questions, follow up with questions, and really look forward to the discussion that will follow. So thank you again, all of you, for joining us. We know that everyone out there is working hard in healthcare and can't imagine what it took for you to clear your time for this. I imagine a few of you might be eating at your desks. But overall, it will be no surprise to everyone that there is still a lot of unknowns in the provider relief funds. What we're going to present first starts with the statutory language, because that's our first level of authority, and then the frequently asked questions. And that is about all we've got. I didn't check this morning, but there, as of last night, there weren't any new frequently asked questions or guidance issued out there. So, of course, disclaimer wise, I think you guys know what you're getting into when you sign up for these webinars, but I'm happy to follow up with any questions. So today, an overview, we're going to talk about provider relief funds, the Consolidated Appropriations Act that was just passed at the end of December, and the impact that that has had, the guidance. We all waited anxiously for that portal to open, and it was kind of a lead balloon. Portal opened, no reporting required yet. I'll just let the cat out of the bag if you didn't know. And then Adam will walk through what we do think we know about what reporting will look like. So I'm just going to quickly recap where we're at, where the money came from. And I know that we're all involved in our niche of healthcare. And so maybe we've been just focused on our own world. There's $178 billion so far that has been provided through the provider relief funds. Most of it showed up unexpectedly based on Medicare receipts, prior billings and receipts prior year, and then has followed with kind of many phases or additional opportunities to have access to some of those funds. And then there's been some on the right, you can see targeted distributions as Health and Human Services really tried to figure out how to distribute these funds to your various groups. And some of you still may be waiting for some of those phase 3 distributions. If you're looking for some quick links on where to get some of this information, some of you I'm sure have been to the Health and Human Services sites, but again, we can provide those links if you're wondering where to get or follow up on some of this information. I'm going to do a quick, see how quick Adam did that for me, 3 pages. a quick 3-slide chronological order. So the first info we got back in September and especially in October really caused an uproar because it didn't seem based on any of the previous intent of Congress to provide these monies. Follow up, HHS rescinded, and I think there was even kind of an apology letter on their change to lost revenue, and they tried to change it to a net income focus. And then since then, there's been additional legislation, as I mentioned at the end of December, more frequently asked questions, several iterations that come out, and not much since January 15th, when the portal opened. So Adam, I'm gonna let you dig into some of the details.
All right. Hello, everybody. So just kind of going forward, the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021. So just kind of some of the high points, as Janet said, late December, so December 27th, 2020, it included about 900 billion in stimulus funds and over 50 billion were to other healthcare related items like vaccine preparedness and PRF funds. So just to note, only 3 billion were provided for the provider relief fund, so it's not as big of a jump as we were expecting. And one other thing to note on the phase 3 is they wanted us to consider financial losses and changes in operating expenses occurred during the 3rd and 4th quarter of calendar year 20 and or the 1st quarter of calendar year 21. So when those get open to being able to apply for, you'll want to be looking at those periods instead. The 2 biggest changes, though, were the lost revenues calculation and the targeted PRF distributions. So the big item with the lost revenues calculation is that they went back to say you can, earlier guidance as of June, so it got rid of the net income approach that they were looking for, and now we can go to more of that budget versus actual without having to look at those expenses as well. One of the key things with the budgets, though, is that you have to have had your budget established and approved prior to March 27th, 2020. Basically when everything was enacted and COVID hit, they didn't want anybody having a budget later than that. We still have a lot of questions regarding that as well that we'll get into a little bit later, but just to note that. Another big one is the targeted distributions. So before they were going to say if you got a targeted distribution for, let's say, your skilled nursing facility, it had to be used in that skilled nursing facility. You couldn't allocate that to another entity. They're a lot more relaxed on that now. If you have that parent subsidiary relationship, you are now able to transfer those distributions from one entity to another. You just want to make sure that you're also keeping track of everything as well. So kind of bringing everything in, the reporting requirements. So it applies to all of those distributions that Janet had in the first slide, your phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and all your targeted distributions. There are certain things it doesn't apply to, and if you did receive less than 10,000 in PRF payments, this whole call is just gonna not apply to you at all, but we're glad you're here. So these are some of the new reporting demographics. So there are 5 elements that are to reporting. On January 15th, they added the 5th one, which is that number 2, which I'll go into these in a little bit more detail later. But the interest on any PRF money that you have earned is now to be reported. All right, So go to the next slide because it's got a little bit more information there. So the reporting entity. So there's still questions, like I said, about that parent subsidiary relationship, but they really do want to know who got the funds, who used the funds. So just make sure that you are tracking everything. So if you are using, let's say, a targeted distribution and you're attributing it to the parent or another entity that had other expenses, then you are going to want to make sure that you're knowing that this money was delivered to this particular entity, and then we transferred it to this entity and they covered it. But like I said, there's still a lot of questions on how the parent subsidiary relationship is going to work out. So this is one of those FAQs that recently came out. It's as of 1/28. So this kind of talks about that parent subsidiary relationship. So generally what they want to see is how, in order to be a parent subsidiary, they're really looking for how that company would roll up into, say, a financial statement or a consolidated tax return. So if you're to say that we have enough of control of this entity that we can make all the decisions that in a financial statement world would cause us to consolidate them in, then you have a little bit more of that parent subsidiary relationship. And if you're consolidating their taxes into your tax return, for those that don't do financial reporting, that would be another way that you can kind of show that you do have that ownership. So TINs. So TINs matter. It's how everything was distributed with the parents and subsidiaries. So they do, like I said, want to make sure that you are reporting, and we still have questions on this, because if it went to one TIN, say it's a targeted distribution, are they going to want a consolidated report from the entire entity? Are they going to want a report from the subsidiary and then the parent? Are you going to have to report that, you know, you received this targeted distribution to one TIN and it went up? Or maybe it's a my subsidiary received part of the money and my parent received money for that subsidiary as well. How do all these things get reported? You have questions, we have questions. We're still waiting on answers, but you know, as soon as we know, we'll let everybody else know. The new one, interest earned on PRF payments. So if you received PRF payments and you put them in an interest-bearing account, the government will not let you earn that interest. You have to take it out of your revenue. So it might be applicable to some people, might not be, depending on where you put it. But if you're a large company and you have a big investment portfolio and you happen to take that money and put it in your investment account and you were earning 7% interest, you might need to take a look at that and back out that interest out of your calculations. Nothing's free with the government right now, except for all the money that we just got. But healthcare related expenses attributable to coronavirus. So the key things here is that you have your two categories. You have your general and you have your general administration, and you have your healthcare related. A couple of keys, these costs cannot be reimbursed or is obligated to be reimbursed from another source, so you would have to back those ones out. But it can include both, but it does need to be attributable to coronavirus. Here are some of the categories that they have identified in the FAQs. So mortgage, rent, insurance, personnel, fringe benefits. So the key here is it's not all of these expenses. I can't just take, okay, here was my mortgage expense for the month. I'm going to take that as an expense. It needs to be both related and incremental in nature to the COVID pandemic. So when we're looking at mortgage and rent, say you needed to rent a second building to do testing in, that would be potentially an incremental cost. And here are some of the healthcare related expenses. Supplies, should be a little bit easier for you to figure out if you had to buy extra PPE for those, but equipment, IT, extra facilities, any other costs involved in it. One thing with all of these expenses is everything's really subjective and judgmental to it. So what you might view as an incremental cost, HHS might not. So what we recommend with any of these expenses when you're putting them in is a lot of documentation as to why you think it's attributable to COVID and how it's an incremental cost. So here are some of the bigger FAQs that have come out about it. So the first one, expenses need to be incremental. The second, it does provide the parent some ability to allocate overhead costs to their subsidiaries. The PRF payments that are applied to COVID expenses after netting out other reimbursement funds. An example of this is if you happen to be in cost-based reimbursement. So if you were going to be reimbursed, let's say $1,000 for a particular patient, then you would actually need to back that cost-based reimbursement out of your lost revenues calculations or your expenses. And salary cap. So if you do have any of those high earners that are being included in your salaries, you want to make sure you cap it out at $197K. Lost revenues. So this is the one that I think everyone gets the most questions on. And we've kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but it's changed quite a bit. So September through November, they went to the net patient care operating margin, comparing 2019 versus 2020 actual. With the new guidance, you get a little bit more flexibility. So you do have a couple different options, which I'll go over in a little bit. One thing to note is that you still do need to report on a quarterly basis, and some of those are by sources of revenue. So you might need to report on who the revenue came from: Medicare, Medicaid, commercial, self-pay. So these are the different types of methods that they're allowing. So 3 different types. One is to use the difference between your 2019 and 2020 actual patient care revenue. This is where you'll also have to submit your patient care mix and do it by your 2020-19 calendar year and by quarter. You can also use 2020 budget versus 2020 actual, but you must submit your budget, a copy of your budget, and that it was approved ahead of time, and an attestation from your C-suite, basically attesting to that fact. And once again, it needed to be approved by March 27th, 2020. And then the last one is just any reasonable method that you can see. But if you're going to do a different method besides actual to actual or budget to actual, you're going to want to make sure that you are including a description of your methodology and why that methodology is reasonable. So there's going to be a lot bigger hurdle for you to have a lot of good documentation as to why you're utilizing that method versus another one. So just some key changes as well, and some of these we still have a lot of open questions on. So other assistance. So if you did get a PPP loan or you did get FEMA, it did get moved out of the lost revenue calculation, and it's put in another section of it. We don't know why. We don't know why they moved it. How are they going to use it? We have no idea. It's an open question. We're still waiting from hearing on them. Reporting on total expenses using those categories has been removed from the calculation, so it's just revenue now. And two options for the 2021 lost revenue, because you will, so unless it's extended, June 30 is that cutoff date. So we want to make sure that when you're reporting January through June, you have your two methods. It's actual versus actual, or actual versus budget. Now, we still have a lot of questions if you're using actual versus budget for this reporting as well, because a lot of it deals with, okay, if I have a budget that needs to be approved before March 27th, if I'm talking 2021, I don't think any of us had our budgets for 2021 approved before the pandemic hit. So lots of questions if you are going to go back. So the 2020 versus 2021 results. So just a couple of other things. PRF, you need to apply it to the expenses first and just the lost revenues. That's a big question for a lot of people, because a lot of people want to, they're saying, oh, I lost 30 million and I only received 5. I don't need to report on the expenses because I have way more than enough revenue, but they actually want the opposite, expenses first, then revenue. Entrance fee amortization, for any of you that have entrance fees in our senior living, it needs to be reported as operating revenue on the financial statements. So it's considered revenue associated with patient services. And then for anybody who has third-party settlements, those out of period care, you can choose not to report. So if you got a settlement for 2017 in 2020 and it was a big settlement, you can decide, well, that wasn't related to 2019 or 2020, so I'm just going to take it out of my revenue stream. So once again, just document those things when you're doing it. So questions. We still have a lot of questions around it. One of the biggest ones is we have a lot of people who are on a fiscal year end and not a calendar year end. So how does that apply when I need to report on a calendar year for in the portal? So if I'm saying, if the HHS wants a January through December and my year end is a September 30th year end, what about those extra 3 months? If I decide to do a budget option, how do I report on those extra 3 months when I don't have a budget available? Do I need to go back to the first quarter of the prior month's budget and use it? Do I need to use actual? All questions that we are still waiting on answers to, and hopefully we receive some soon. Not much here, just additional data. So they're just going to ask for a lot of metrics are going to be asked from you. It shouldn't be much that you guys don't already have, but just be aware that you're going to need personnel metrics, hires, rehires, patient metrics. So your total patient visits, whether they're in-person, telehealth, admits, beds available, how many surgeries, just random facts that they're going to be asking for during it. And I don't know how many it applies to, but if there was a change in ownership in your entity for the year, we would need to factor that in as well. So these are those other assistance received. So they're just asking you to report on all the following. Once again, still don't know why, but we kind of already went over that piece as well. And just some open questions that we're still waiting on answers to that we just referred to. PRF portal, I won't spend much time on this. Just to note, it did actually open on 1/15 like they said they were going to, so that was good news. But they only allowed you to register, and they moved the reporting deadline to a date to be determined. So we still don't know when the reporting deadline is. Last I checked, but there's not much in the portal right now. Other than just being able to register. We do recommend that you do go look at the portal, kind of get yourself familiar with it. If you have the things you need to go through the registration process, you can do that as well, but there's actually nothing that you can put in yet on it. So this is just some slides of the portal, so I'll skip those over. But single audit. This is one that, once again, it might be new to some of you, and some of you are probably used to it because you have to do it every year. So the single audit, one thing that has changed, and it should be pointed out, is if you are a for-profit entity that did receive funds, usually a single audit is based off of expenditures. However, for-profit entities related to the HHS funds, you will have a single audit if you received more than $750,000. And for nonprofit or governmental entities, it's still the same trigger of when they were expended over $750,000. A couple of notes on the single audit before I toss it back to Janet. So we're still waiting on guidance on what's going to be required for testing. We thought it was going to come out in the compliance supplement, which came out on the 27th with everything else, but it didn't. It just kind of said, to be determined. If you are not a calendar year end, so if your year end was before 12/31/20, you are to leave the provider relief funds off your fiscal year 2020 CFA. It will be reported on your fiscal year end 2021 CFA. And we're still unsure what's going to be required. All they said was look to the 2021 compliance supplement. So it could be an all or nothing thing for any of you that maybe have a 6/30 year end. Maybe if it shuts down at 6/30/21 like it's supposed to, and you're supposed to have all the funds expended by then it could just be here, do one full report for the whole period, or it could be report on the 2020 spending in 21, and then you'll have to do it again the next year. One more thing for many of you who don't really know what a single audit is. So it is a type of audit that we do to to check your compliance over how you were spending these funds. It's part of the requirement is that you have an actual financial statement audit with it. So for those of you who are wondering what a financial statement audit is, because you're one of the few lucky people who never have to see me every year, then you might wonder, okay, do I now need to go and get involved with an audit and now have to do this single audit as well just to give this through? The answer to that's no. You do have an option of doing what they call a program audit, where it would just be this specific program where you don't have to go through the financial statement piece of it. So that might be of more applying to some of you for-profit entities that never have to do that financial reporting, where you say, well, I don't want to spend all the money on getting an audit done. What can you do for me? That's one of those things that is available, is doing one of those program audits. So I'll just kind of kick it over to Janet at this point.
Yeah. Thanks, Adam. Thanks. So what do we think everybody should be doing right now? Well, the portal opened on January 15th. If you go in there and register, I'll give you a couple warnings. First of all, it times out on you. So be prepared when you go in there that you've got the information it needs. If you have multiple entities, the different TINs that Adam was talking about that got funded, for some reason, all the entities that you want to report on, you need a unique email, right, as the contact. So that's been a little bit of a challenge for some of our organizations to have enough emails. And supposedly those email registrations will get updates from HHS. So the portal opened on January 15th for registration. Our first reporting deadline was supposed to be February 15th. When the portal opened, it was extended, although we were not given a new extension date. There's some very old language from last summer that indicates that PRF funds needed to be spent by the end of June. So that's about all we have to go on. I would tell you, it's just my personal opinion that when they do open that portal, we'll get more than 30 days, because every other government website that has opened in the course of, related to this has crashed, right? So I don't think that they can open a portal and expect us all to report within 30 days. I think we're going to get a few more days than that. A couple of other things that we obviously, and I'm sure you, the group here as well, have their eye on is the legislation, the Rescue Act that has made it through the House. There's a substantial amount of funds in there for healthcare in various buckets as the pandemic has evolved and as we've seen where resources need to be deployed. But there's also $5 million in there for the OIG to follow up for audit and review of these provider relief funds and the spend on them. So yes, they are thinking about coming back through and auditing for proper use. But I do think that's one of the reasons too that we don't have a system yet and know exactly what we're reporting on, because as legislation keeps happening, funds keep flowing for different reasons and different people. They've got to start accommodating all of those cascading events into a reporting process. So again, happy to take questions in the Q&A, but really interested in hearing, kicking it back to you, Kek, to hear how Mark and Scott have been dealing with it.
Thank you, Janet. So at this point, we would love to now throw it to our panelists, Mark and Scott. Mark, I'll start with you. Why don't you tell us about Eschaton and how the financial operations have changed, and what impacts have you experienced so far?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so Eschaton is a Northern California-based senior living company. We've been around for about 50 years. In its current form, we focus purely on kind of services and product offerings for older adults. Way in the past, we owned hospitals and a number of kind of healthcare related things, but we've really settled in the senior space over the last kind of 30 years. We offer a number of products from kind of residential living, independent living, assisted living, memory care, as well as like post-acute skilled nursing and rehab care. And then we have 23 different HUD 202 contracts. And then we have a kind of a smattering of home-based services that we offer. So anything in senior living we basically do or try to do, which kind of makes it unique through COVID, obviously, because we've been impacted in so many portions of our business. No doubt we're been affected by, reduced occupancy, which caused revenue to be down. We have, received a number of HHS stimulus funds, kind of in excess of $4 million, which has helped. But that's barely offset our direct costs related to COVID, both in the form of like employee type costs, and then the actual like real physical tangible costs of COVID, purchasing supplies, PPE, like so much that everybody's heard of. Putting scrubbers on all of our air conditioners throughout all our buildings, trying to, kill the virus, just a number of things that we've done, kind of real direct costs. So obviously the biggest impact to us in COVID is occupancy. So, senior living, kind of senior communities obviously have been a focus during the pandemic, just due to the inherent vulnerable nature of our residents. So that's something we've been working through, and things are slowly starting to come back. But it really, some of the challenges is we're a heavily regulated industry, and being Escatons in several different areas regulated by several different government bodies. We fall to prey, as so many companies do. We kind of go to the most extreme regulatory body in any given instance, and that's what guides our whole business. So we've been really impacted in trying to navigate through this, and looking at the stimulus funds and some of the uncertainty that we've had, and kind of changing rules and regulations is only one part of it. All the other challenges in running our businesses today is a much bigger part, with our main goal of keeping people safe, right? Both our employees and our residents. So that's really what we focused on, and kind of in the spirit of making sure that we can maintain that greater than $4 million in funds we received. Is very early we started tracking our COVID related costs, specifically on our GL. So we have a COVID related line item that we monitor on a routine basis, and kind of get on a quarterly basis from our many executive directors a confirmation that the completeness and accuracy. So in a way, we did a process to track them, and then had some controls in place to monitor and make sure that we have them complete, knowing that one day we're going to have to kind of fess up. So that's kind of the high level summary, and some quick things that we did early on. If you haven't done that, I'd recommend now starting to dig through your GL and your expense categories, trying to identify those COVID costs, because the sooner the better, because I have a feeling those things are going to be necessary at whatever point you need to get forgiveness of those loans, or of the funds you've received.
Scott, I think I will throw the same question over to you. Tell us about Dignity and the financial operations, how it's changed and what impacts you've experienced.
Sure, thanks. I work for Dignity Health, which is the current iteration of what used to be Catholic Healthcare West, going back to the early 90s. They changed their name to Dignity Health probably 7 or 8 years ago. And since then, we've also merged with another large, fully integrated healthcare provider, Catholic Health Initiatives, which was a perfect match for us, because most of their facilities fall outside of the Dignity Health service area, which is Nevada, California, and Arizona. So they really allowed us to expand beyond our current service area. And it's kind of a match made in heaven. Not that there haven't been any hiccups along the way, but that new organization is Common Spirit Health. So that's the current entity. So that actually went into effect a year ago, February. So if you're looking at the calendar, a month after that, COVID hit. So we've been dealing with multiple fronts of growing pains, and as well as dealing with a pandemic at the same time. A lot of the things that we've been doing to adjust are a lot of things that Mark mentioned. One specific thing for this division, of which I'm in the Greater Sacramento division, which actually just got combined with Northern California. So we actually now stretch all the way up to Redding and all the way down through San Francisco for the service area that we belong to. Previously, it was just Sacramento, which had a lot more hospitals in close proximity. But one of the big things that this market did is we pulled out of a lease. We took the hit and pulled out of a lease out in Rancho Cordova for administrative space. So work from home is in full swing here, and it keeps getting pushed off as to when they want people to start actually going back into the offices. Right now, I think the tentative time to go back is going to be in July. But long term, at least the strategy right now is that it's going to be an ongoing thing. We will continue to have administrative staff, especially home office staff, working from home and being virtually present. As far as the actual impacts that we've been working, it was interesting because we did get, I'm not sure the exact word, but there were allowances made for nursing ratios. The guidance essentially was, if it's a COVID patient, the guidance is 3 to 1. Compare that to our typical med surge of 4 to 1 or 5 to 1, depending on if they're tele or not. But if you don't have the staff to do that, you know, the CNA and others were giving us a, you know, kind of a pass on that. We stuck to it when the QID required it, but it's just one of those things that, you know, you don't see coming. How do you adjust on the fly and get nurses that maybe you don't have or aren't available? How do you get them in-house to treat your patients and do it safely, ramping up with PPE, et cetera? So those are the big challenges that we faced, and we're continuing, you know, with door screenings and additional manpower required to do that. Stopping and starting physical therapy, all those things. Just as guidance came out, you're pivoting as soon as you can to not only adhere and be compliant with the guidelines, but, you know, also keep your staff and your patients and your visitors and your employees safe. So, you know, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but, you know, that's just a lot of the stuff that we've been dealing with.
At this time, I also want to remind our attendees that they are welcome to ask questions. Please raise your hand or let me know in some way that you have a question, and I will unmute you and make sure that your question gets asked. I will continue to ask some additional questions until I see a raised hand that comes through. So at this time, Scott, can you tell us how the and use of funds has gone for Dignity?
Sure. I mean, understanding the purpose of it, just to keep doors open and not have hospitals, you know, go out of business. That initially was what it was used for. I mean, it was, cash flow was top priority because we stopped initially back in March. We stopped elective procedures, and at that time there wasn't a surge on the horizon, so we were eliminating those elective procedures and not seeing a surge of patients to fill our beds. So volumes dropped, you know, 50, 60%, depending on the facility. So it really was used for its intended purposes, to keep the doors open. And not to mention the additional staff requirements that we needed to do what we needed to do to keep people safe and screen and et cetera. And now it's funny because we've seen the surge and we've seen elective surgeries go away and we've started to see them come back. And it's almost scary how those two curves are kind of intersecting. So we essentially utilize all the funds that were provided, and now we're kind of getting to the end of that road, and we're thinking, okay, well, you know, it worked out pretty well, at least for us. And depending on it, really does depend on the facility, but for the facilities that I interact with, it's really fortuitous the way it kind of worked out. That, you know, yeah, we got this bolus of extra funds to kind of cover us through the downturn in business, et cetera. And now it's slowly starting to come back. The question is going to be, to what degree does it come back? Which services do come back, and how, you know, different macro issues will impact it as well.
Mark, I think I'll throw the same question over to you.
Yeah, it's been an interesting time. I mean, you know, it really is that, you know, the funds have been great. We have the benefit of all of our care centers that we're kind of, you know, eligible to receive the funds are all in the same TIN, which you guys touched on in your presentation, which made it pretty good and straightforward. And it was kind of a no-brainer to us of how to apply the funds, because we had direct costs going out the door and every day. It's just, really for us, it's how long is this going to last, and how deep is it going to go? And with the positive outlook of kind of the vaccine on the horizon, we have the benefit of having vaccine clinics scheduled at all of our communities, and everybody who wants a vaccine will have the opportunity to get one by the end of March. It's just really how quickly is the business going to rebound, and how is the senior living space or kind of post-acute space going to look going forward? And those are questions that we're kind of asking on a daily basis and answering on a daily basis, and then re-answering, kind of as new inputs come in. So it's a real challenge, as well as just the inherent challenges all of us as humans going through a pandemic have been dealing with, of each employee being affected on a daily basis in a different sense. So it's kind of everything. You're running your immediate business, your kind of micro and macro business all at the same time, as well as planning cash flow and future projections. So it's been a wild ride, and even though I think things are improving, I don't think it's over yet.
Wow. Still feeling the effects of all of this, right? And so that kind of leads me to my next question. And Mark, I'll throw it out to you. What went right, what went wrong, and what did you do to pivot because of COVID?
Yeah, I think the one thing we did really well is we acted very quickly. When COVID came out, we kind of saw the risks, and we had our first COVID meeting, I think, at the end of February last year, where we started it. Okay, this thing's out there. Experts are saying this and that, and kind of the extreme side, it could be this, but on the very positive side, it could be this. And we kind of were talking about, kind of early, acted early and often. I think some other things we did really well is getting with our suppliers and main kind of business partners. We started a task force in late March, because we saw as the rush or grab for PPE started in all industries and all aspects, what was our normal pipeline and channels of supplies were starting to become constrained. So we started, Kaiser's one of our major partners from a kind of a discharge standpoint into our skilled nursing. And we start with our suppliers like McKesson and several others, basically put a task force together to make sure that we didn't have any gaps in our supplies and what we needed. And I can say, firsthand, during the whole pandemic, Eschaton had the PPE it needed, which was great. And I think that early intervention, and that was in so many ways in every aspect of, making sure we could capitalize on a PPP loan. So Eschaton couldn't, due to the kind of consolidated entity requirements of the SBA, but we managed some companies that could. So we were able to get a PPP loan for people. So it really was being adaptive and listening, and people coming in my office, hey, can you raise my credit card limit for 500 to 50,000? I'm going to buy 140,000 N95s today, and I need room on my card. So really just being very responsive to what the needs are to make sure that we can continue to struggle, because that's the kind of thing we had to do. PPE was a gold rush for a lot of people. And people that were making clothing on March 5th were making masks on March 29th. So it's just this switch of kind of the channels of where we were coming. I think it was acting quick and being adaptive to the challenges, because they were ever changing. And it's just like today. Our biggest struggle today is administering the vaccine. That's not something we've done on wide scale, but now we have, and we're figuring out a way to do it. So it really is just that quick response and kind of being adaptive that got us through.
Scott, I'll throw that same question over to you.
Yeah, I'd like to echo a lot of what Mark said. One of the benefits of being a large organization is we saw those benefits. So one of the biggest intentions of doing that merger was to have leverage on negotiations, et cetera. But also to really have as many access points to supply chain, different access points, contingency plans on contingency plans, as far as getting PPE when we needed it. I don't know if I could say that wouldn't have been possible if we were just Dignity Health or CHI on our own. But absolutely the income spirit combined, we saw the power that comes along with that, and the nimbleness, even though being a large company, being able to pivot and jump and say, okay, yeah, we need this, or this hospital needs this. XYZ hospital's 10 miles down the road, let's share. Whereas if you're not merged, you don't necessarily have that opportunity. Or even hospitals in, I don't know, Wichita, which we have. But, you know, there's this integrated network that you don't have when you're kind of isolated. Or even, we were talking about this yesterday, prepping, but, you know, critical access facilities, independently, you know, critical access facilities that are part of a large organization like us aren't kind of left out in the cold the way independents might be. So having that in our back pocket really helped things go right. How many things went wrong? Probably a million. But it wasn't, you know, them going wrong. It's how we reacted, how we recovered, and what we learned from them as we went through. Yeah, I don't even know if I could name a specific example, because you know, we're in the middle of true chaos from day to day. But you know, it's a statement on how strong the team is, and how people lean on each other, that, you know, help kind of shows the strength of that when you're coming out at the end.
Right. That kind of brings me to one of our next questions that we had, which was, you mentioned mergers with common spirit. What do you see post-COVID regarding M&As, mergers and acquisitions?
I would be shocked if it didn't accelerate. I think this has kind of been an eye-opener for a lot of facilities, not only to the benefits, but to the real vulnerable position that they are in by being independent. So I would absolutely see an acceleration in it. Whether the regulators allow it, that's another question. But I think the appetite is going to be there, just not only from the smaller independents, but from the larger groups that are looking to expand and continue to get those economies of scale and leverage in negotiations, et cetera. And not only with vendors, but with government entities as well. I think the benefits are just too far outweigh the headaches of getting to, you know, going through those growing pains. And yeah, I think it's here to stay unless the government intervenes.
Mark, you want to throw in your thoughts on M&As?
Yeah, totally. I agree with Scott. I think he's right. It's going to speed things up. Our industry is unique. The senior living space is kind of bisected by nonprofit operators like Eschaton, and then for-profit operators, which there are many out there. And they kind of operate in two different spheres, and at times companies go back and forth, either, you know, through a transaction of buy or sell, goes back and forth from one to the other. But for the most part, we kind of operate in our own lanes. And so in the not-for-profit space in particular, it was already a trend that we saw happening, kind of where a single site would merge with a larger organization. And in some cases, there's been some recent announcements in Northern California of larger organizations merging to create, you know, kind of behemoth organizations. So we're seeing some of that. So, you know, it's interesting. We've reached, you know, Eschaton is known in the industry as somebody that's open to consolidations or mergers or acquisitions. And so we get stuff thrown at us all the time. And it kind of went quiet during COVID, which I think you inherently would expect, because everybody's working on, you know, the kind of very real thing at their, you know, at their doorstep. And we haven't really heard it start to come back yet. And our speculation is some of these stimulus funds, and if they received a PPP loan, which most of these small organizations would be eligible for, that may have, you know, kind of cured some of their short-term cash needs. And so maybe even kept them a little more, you know, kind of flush or fluid over a period of time. So we know that that's coming. You know, kind of like, you know, knowing it's a bubble, it's going to pop. It's like, you know, S&P returned better than 16% last year. Do we think we're going to get that every year? No. So, you know, there's also a lot of favorable things that have helped people stay around. But I think everybody feels that there's something going to give at some point, and there will be these changes. I just hope that the companies do it with the foresight and think it through, that they do it well in advance, because making decisions when you have the ability of many options is always better than being forced to make a decision which you might not have a good option to come out of it. So act very proactively if you're in one of those situations, being my recommendation.
All right, I have a few more questions, and again, a reminder to anyone, if you have some additional questions, please raise your hand and I will absolutely unmute you. Have you seen or expected changes in your workforce? And then, I will throw in the one additional piece of it, and are you requiring your workforce to be vaccinated? I'll throw that to Mark.
Okay. No, we're not requiring it. It is something we've talked about, and I think it's, I don't know if I've heard rumors of companies requiring it, but they're not publicly saying that. If it's something they're saying internal, it's different than what they're publicly saying outwardly facing. Eschaton historically has been a very much kind of your traditional work in the office space, which I know many of us in accounting and finance tend to like, at least in my generation, I think and above, tend to like the work in the office arrangement. I was one that was a big proponent against, or sorry, not a proponent, but I was against working from home. I just didn't think it worked, but I was wrong. We kind of, in the course of a few days, when the state and county put in place their stay-at-home measures, we very quickly mobilized, and everybody's been working from home. Our staff, we're in the office, about 30 to 40% of our office is in the building on any daily basis, and we rotate in and out. Those of us that are lucky enough to have an office, we can close our doors and work. We wear masks routinely around the office. And so it has worked. I think we've survived. I don't know if you can thrive really with a substantial work from home workforce in the accounting and finance space in particular. But I've been wrong once, and I've been wrong a lot. But I've been once in this area, and who knows, I could be wrong again. I think it just really changes your responsibility as financial leaders, finance management and accounting leaders, in how you manage your staff, because we're all working managers, right? So we have our own host of work we have to do, as well as our routine review. And then you have, and you have to manage people. So it shifts the burden more to the manage people piece. And that's something we've done relatively well. But it is something, it's a work in progress. And we're starting to talk, similar to Scott mentioned a few minutes ago, we're starting to plan for what it's like when people come back into the office. We're fortunate that our staff has been able to get the vaccine or had the opportunity to get the vaccine. So that's helped, I think, in making that call back into office easier, because people have had the option of getting vaccinated. But it's going to be a challenge, because we were already fighting this kind of work from home arrangement, and a number of people wanted to do it. So many of our peer organizations do it already. That is going to be a challenge. And when we've kind of started or tried to bring that number up from 30 to 40% up to kind of 50 to 70%, we receive pushback. So it's something we're going to have to do very carefully, and where historically we haven't had a routine work from home type of setup, we may have to have something one day a week, one day a pay period, to kind of give that nod to our employees who kind of earned it. They showed they can do it and be responsible.
Same question to you, Scott.
Sure. So Dignity Health and Common Spirit Health do not require employees to get vaccinated. It's purely voluntary. It's obviously strongly encouraged. And there's even been multiple propaganda campaigns where they're doing interviews with everyone under the sun, everyone that's gotten it, advocating, saying yes, it's a great thing. Please do it for your patients, for your family, et cetera, et cetera. So it's strongly encouraged, but yes, not required. We don't want to go down that road. As far as kind of our philosophy, I think a lot of that infrastructure was already there, and a bulk of our finance staff are exempt, so they're not hourly. We're not, trying to chase them down to complete tasks, et cetera. That's just the way they've been. That's kind of the way their job has always worked. You get your tasks done. You work the hours that you need to get those tasks done. If that's 50, 60 hours a week, so be it. If it's 30, 40, even better. Either way. So I think that that philosophy has kind of already been ingrained. Just about every employee already had laptops and you can access, et cetera. So I think we benefited from that. We lucked out. We didn't have to tackle that in the midst of a pandemic as well. So I know I'm grateful for that. But to Mark's point, now it's okay. We've done this. We're in it. How do we phase back, or do we phase back? Like I mentioned, we pulled out of a large lease in Rancho Cordova, so that space isn't available anymore. So what do? We do have a building that we own in Rancho, so now it's okay, well, who's not going to be there anymore, and who's going to be floating in from the other facility? Or do we just do a lot of hotel suites, a lot of hotel office space that you reserve and you come in when you need to come in? Otherwise, the default is work from home. I don't know. We're still in the midst of it. I know from my personal perspective, and some of my colleagues, we actually do work in the hospital. So having dedicated office space in the hospital is pretty special. So you use it because you have it. And one of the biggest benefits of that is being really close to other administrators, other C-suite folks that you have access when you need it. You're not waiting for a Zoom. You're not trying to get them on a chat or a phone call, et cetera. You can run into them in the hallway. So I think it's going to be a balance. It's just going to be interesting because we've gone so far on one side of the pendulum. Do we swing all the way back, or do we kind of fall somewhere in the middle? It's a real interesting time.
So since COVID, what changes do you think will be permanent that you've implemented into the organization? And I'll throw that out to Scott. And I think this will be our last question. And then I will throw out topics that we will talk about for our next CFO Roundtable.
Yeah. That is going to be the $1 million question. And it's going to be phased in. It's going to be a trial and error. It's going to be, okay, well, does everyone feel good with doing that? Should we do that? And then once you do it, does it blow up in your face or does it work? And you're kind of feeling your way through it. I think door screeners are going to be here for, I don't know, I'd give it a year at least. Just because, even depending on what the level of vaccination is, what the effectiveness is on the general population, outbreaks, et cetera, different strains of the virus, we don't know. So I think those are here to stay, maybe not to the degree that we had them initially. And Dignity has, we've leveraged technology so that we don't have to use the manpower necessarily that we did at the beginning. So that's probably another thing that's going to continue on. We're going to find innovative ways to do things that we have to do now that we didn't have to do then, but do them more efficiently and more cost effectively. So I wish I could give you specific examples beyond that, but it's really going to be the wild, wild west here, just trying to figure things out and as we go, and looking at what's working and what's not, and what can be improved.
What do you think about telehealth?
I'll jump on that one too. Yeah, so absolutely, that's something that's going to be here to stay. To what degree, and what kind of technological innovations will allow it to be more cost effective for smaller entities? Yeah, I don't see that going anywhere, and it may even expand beyond where it already has, which is exponentially more than what it was before the pandemic. I know all our clinics use it. We do virtual visits. We also do telemedicine within the hospitals for behavioral health and neuro. We actually have robots that navigate the hospital floors and meet with patients and diagnose them and treat them. Obviously can't do like surgeries or anything, but in behavioral health or stroke related, you can make those make that identification, make recommendations, and do what doctors would do if they were actually in the space. So yeah, I don't see that going anywhere. In all likelihood, it's probably going to be expanding as we go forward.
Mark, what do you think will be permanent in your space?
Yeah, I think, some of the things that we so common get used to, like masks and temperature checks, I mean, those things are not going away. We in our space deal with, kind of traditional flu season, as I'm sure many, providers do. Today we have a requirement that if you don't have a flu shot, you have to wear a mask, right, during flu season. I could foresee, regulations being passed that, temperature checks now are routine during flu season, or all the time, maybe, I don't know. And masking too, on top of other, because, proof is in the pudding. Sure, COVID has crept in, but our existence of non-COVID flu is basically non-existent. That's something we do deal with routinely. So those are things come in. Employee benefit side of things. Like one thing, Eschaton's said, we have a self-funded health plan, benefit plan, and we didn't cover telehealth. So on that side of things, we do now, and we probably will forever. As well as just like little things that you don't realize. Well, our plan had, only covered 30 days of prescriptions. Well, that was challenging for people to get in and out to get prescriptions. We raised it to 90. And so little things throughout our business that will, when I'm gone, nobody will remember why we changed it and just become the norm. We offer kind of a small bonus to people who are working with, COVID positive patients. That may be something we continue with other infectious things like the flu and other diseases that we encounter routinely. Those things I think will be around forever. I have a feeling I'll get my temperature checked every day for the foreseeable future, until this thing's well and gone from our memory.
Sadly, I agree. Yeah, masks. As much as sometimes I hate it and my kids hate it, I think that's more permanent than we think. So thank you, Mark and Scott and Janet and Adam, for your time. We really do appreciate it. The goal eventually is that we can make this an in-person roundtable where maybe one of you are able to offer up your location as the place for the roundtable, and eventually to be able to network in person and to be able to have these conversations in person versus just via Zoom. I will be sending out some topics that we think will be good topics for our next roundtable. One example is how are your lenders reacting to your financial situation with COVID? What are those conversations looking like? People management is another topic that we'll be throwing out to you, and whether or not you might want to see a topic on that. Some macro issues we talked about, the macro impact of this, the impact of layoffs that have already happened, and the potential impacts of future layoffs that can happen because of COVID. One of the areas that Mark threw out there was that the hardening of the insurance market because of COVID. Surprisingly, COVID even affects insurance. Your property of your locations, your management liability, your employment practices and directors and officers, auto liability, all of that is all part of what's happening in the insurance world that is going to be tightening up. Carriers are not playing in this industry anymore, and that might be a topic you want to learn about. Mark also just mentioned right now, self-funding for employee benefits. How do you control your organization's costs? Maybe self-funding might be a tool that you can look at as an additional area in which you can control costs for your organization. I will be sending out emails and maybe to everyone who was in attendance today and get out a survey and just have everyone pick. But again, I want to thank everyone for attending. We appreciate your time. At this point, if you don't have any additional questions, I will be closing up our webinar. Everyone have a wonderful afternoon, and we appreciate you spending this time with us. Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, Kek.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.